So why am I comparing the Sony FX3 to the Sony FS7? The FS7 came out in 2014 and the FX3 came out in 2021. It's kind of a big gap between those 2 years, and the technology between those years have improved dramatically. Well, I definitely think the Sony FS7 holds up to this day, and I really wanted to compare the Sony FX3 and FS7 to see how much of a difference there really is, or how little of a difference there really is. Now, me and my friends went out and filmed some stuff so we can compare the two cameras. Now, the main thing we need to get out of the way is the Sony FX3 is a full-frame camera, and the Sony FS7 is an APS-C or Super 35 camera. Now what that means is that the Sony FS7 sensor size is a lot smaller than the Sony FX3 sensor size. Now, Super 35 has been used in cinema for many years, and I don't really think that's a huge problem, to be honest. Sure, when using a 50mm glass, the subjects will seem a lot more closer than the full frame, which I've noticed, but I don't think that's really that big of a deal, to be honest. So I'm going to show you both footage. The left one is going to be the Sony FS7 and the right one is going to be the Sony FX3. And I want you to tell me what you think. Is there really that big of a difference between the Sony FX3 and Sony FS7 when it comes to just image quality? Now, filming with these cameras, I used the exact same lens. I used the Nikon Nikkor 50mm glass. I love this lens. I think it looks beautiful. It's a vintage glass. It's very well made. Now, one thing I first noticed is the Sony FS7 has a slower readout than the FX3. The effect that I put on the tube light really shows how slow the FS7. You can almost tell that it's going from bottom top or top to bottom, just reading out the light when it flashes on or off. I never really noticed how dramatic it was until I compared it to the FX3, where it just really looks like it's just pretty natural, to be honest. Now, the Sony FX3 is not a global shutter, but it is really fast and it's really hard to tell how slow the FX3 is. Now, there are other videos out there testing how fast the Sony FX3 sensor is, so if you want to check that out, check out those other videos. Now, since the Sony FS7 is a Super 35 sensor, there is a bit more noise in the shadow, and it's very apparent in the low light footage. Now, the Sony FS7 is stuck on ISO 2000 if you're filming on Cine EI. The Sony FX3 has dual native ISO. Shooting in low light in the dark at night is way easier than the Sony FS7, since the Sony FS7 doesn't really have a dual native ISO. One of the main things I noticed is the Sony FS7 really leans into magenta. Now, you will especially see it on skin tones. It really leans into that magenta tone. But I also noticed on the FX3, it leans a bit warmer than the FS7, which I found a bit interesting. Now, it's especially more apparent in the outside shots. You can really see how much warmer the FX3 is. Now, when I went to DaVinci and graded this footage, I used the same exact power grade that I always use. Now, like I said, they're both on the same settings. They're both on S-Log3, 10-bit 422. And I just found it surprising how much warmer the FX3 is compared to the FS7. Now, one of the main advantages that having a full frame sensor is that the depth of field is a lot more shallower with a full frame sensor. The background is just much more blurry. Now, that could be an advantage or disadvantage. It depends how you see it. I think it's better. I'd like it a bit more blurry, but it depends with everyone's taste. Now, I'm not gonna go super in depth of each camera. I'm not gonna compare each setting, each little thing, but I just wanted to make just a quick thing comparing these two cameras and just day-to-day filming and just seeing how much of a difference there really is. I still think the Sony FX3 will win the FS7 time and time again, but I think the gap between those two cameras are a lot smaller than most people will think. But I want you to tell me what you think. Do you think the Sony FS7 does not compare to the Sony FX3 by any means, or do you think they're a lot closer than you ever thought? Go ahead and tell me in the comments, and thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, it really helps out. Leave me a like, It encourages me to make more videos like these, and I have plenty more videos planned for the future, so be sure to stick around, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Be sure to keep rolling. See you guys.